In September of 1887, a mineral surveyor named Walter Prather rode north out of Fort Benton with 2 pack mules, a transit case, and a letter of introduction from an Eastern copper syndicate that wanted to know whether the ore body at Butte continued under the plains toward the Canadian line. Prather was 34 years old, a Pennsylvania-trained engineer who had already logged 4 seasons in the territory, and he was not a man given to writing down things that had not happened. His field book survives today in a private collection in Great Falls, water-stained along the spine, and it is the only reason any of this can be told at all. He was hired to look at rock. He ended up looking at something else, and the difference between the two is the entire story. Prather's field book is not a diary. It is a working document, laid out the way every mineral surveyor of that period laid one out, with a dated entry for each camp, a running tally of assay samples, and terse notes on terrain, water, and the reliability of the men he hired. 90% of it reads like every other surveyor's book from that decade, dry, competent, entirely forgettable. That consistency is what makes the exception worth taking seriously. A man does not fake unremarkable paperwork for 6 days, and then, on the 7th, fabricate the single strangest entry of his career, for no reason he ever explained to anyone. The ordinary pages are what give the extraordinary page its weight. The ground he was sent to was the Sweetgrass Hills, 3 island mountains rising out of the plains of what is now Toole and Liberty County, close enough to the border that a man could see Canada from the higher slopes. Copper had made Montana rich that year. Butte alone would produce more than 78 million pounds of it by December, and every syndicate east of the Mississippi wanted to know how far the mineral belt ran. The Sweetgrass Hills looked, on paper, like a plausible northern extension of it. What Prather found there was not copper. It was a hole in a mountain that the men guiding him would not go near, and a room inside that hole that, once he saw it, he understood exactly why. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. The Blackfeet had lived in and around those hills for longer than any written record accounts for, and Prather's party included 2 guides from the reservation, hired at the agency in Fort Benton because no Eastern surveyor crossed that country alone in the 1880s and lived to file a report. Prather's book names neither of them. It lists them only as the 2 Piegan men, which was standard practice for a government contractor of that decade, and is, in its own way, part of the record's failure rather than a detail within it. What the book does record, in Prather's own hand, is that on the 4th day out from the wagon road, both guides stopped at the base of the East Butte and would not climb further with the party. Prather wrote that they were not frightened in any manner he recognized as fear. They were simply finished. One of them, he wrote, told him through the interpreter that the mountain ahead held a place that did not belong to men, and that he would wait with the stock. Prather asked, through the interpreter, whether the 2 men would at least point out the location before turning back, so the survey party would not waste a day searching blind. The guide who did the talking refused that too, according to Prather's own note, saying only that Prather's eyes would find it once he was close enough, and that no one needed to be shown a thing like that twice. It is a strange thing for a surveyor to write down without comment, a stranger thing that he never returned to it later in the book to ask what the man had meant, and strangest of all that events proved the guide correct. Prather went up without them, with his rodman and 1 packer. What he found, a little more than halfway up the East Butte's northern face, was an opening scarcely large enough for a man to turn his shoulders into, a crack in the rock that any casual eye would have passed as a common fissure. He went in on his stomach, the way the ground demanded, elbows and knees against stone worn smooth by something. The passage was short. It opened into a chamber his own survey later put at close to 50 feet high. A vaulted room lit not by any lamp the party carried, but by 2 openings far overhead, where the rock had broken through to daylight, so that the room stood lit in a shifting green and grey, the colour of the light coming down through the hole in the roof. Prather's book calls it, in a phrase he underlined once, a room built by no one, and finished by no one, and yet finished. He measured what he could. The chamber floor was relatively level, cleared of the loose rubble that fills every collapsed chamber of that kind, and along one wall he noted what he described only as the old fireground, a blackened patch of stone with no charcoal or bone left in it, scoured clean the way a hearth is scoured clean by people who intend to come back. There were no tools left behind, no carved marks, nothing a surveyor could log as artifact. He did note, along the base of the eastern wall, a shallow depression worn into the stone itself rather than cut into it, the kind of wear that comes from repeated contact rather than a single striking blow, though he offered no theory as to what had produced it, and admitted in the same line that he had no comparison to draw on from any other rock formation he had surveyed. What struck him enough to write it down twice was the quiet. He noted that no wind moved through the chamber despite the two open skylights above it, and that his own voice, when he spoke, did not carry the way it should have in a room of that size. He wrote that it felt occupied, though there was no one in it, and he could not explain what he meant by that even to himself, because he tried, crossed the sentence out, and left it half-legible in the book. He was down off the mountain by dusk. The two guides were exactly where he had left them, and neither man asked what he had found. Prather wrote that this, more than anything else that day, unsettled him, because in 4 seasons of territory work, he had never met a guide indifferent to what a survey party brought back down a mountain. They already knew. What happened next is where the record does what records in cases like this tend to do. It goes quiet in the specific place where it should be loudest. Prather's contract required a full mineral report to the syndicate's office in Boston, and that report survives in a company letterbook now held by a historical archive in Helena. It runs 4 pages. It describes assay figures for 3 other locations he examined that season in exhaustive detail, down to the percentage of copper carbonate in a hand sample from the West Butte slope. On the East Butte chamber, the entire company report says only this, that an opening of no commercial value was noted on the northern face, and that further examination was not recommended. 4 pages of numbers, and the one thing in his own field book that reads like the discovery of a lifetime gets a single dismissive sentence in the document meant to inform his employer. A surveyor paid by the day, in a boom year, with every incentive to pad a report and justify another season's wages, chose instead to bury the most remarkable find of his career in 7 words. Prather stayed in the territory only 1 more season. He surveyed for the Great Northern Right-of-Way Cruise through 1889 and then left mineral work entirely, taking a position with a railroad engineering office in Spokane, where he remained until his retirement. He never published on the Sweetgrass Hills, never returned to them by any account that survives, and the field book itself did not surface publicly until his great-granddaughter donated a box of his papers to the Great Falls Historical Society in 1994. The archivist who processed the collection flagged the East Butte pages as being of possible ethnographic interest and moved on to the next box. In the 32 years since, 4 researchers have requested to see it. 2 were undergraduate students working on regional mining history who cited the East Butte entry in passing footnotes and never returned to the collection. A third was a geologist from the State University who examined the pages in 2011, photographed them for his own records, and told the archivist on his way out that the description matched no natural karst or lava tube formation he was aware of in that rock type, and that he did not intend to publish on it because it fell outside his actual research and he had no wish to wade into territory not his to interpret. The 4th request came from a distant relative of Prather's, simply looking for family history, and left with no more explanation than anyone else who has opened that book. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. The chamber Prather found still exists. It is known today, to the small number of people who make the climb, as the Devil's Chimney, and it sits inside a range that both the Blackfeet and the neighboring Chippewa-Cree have held as sacred ground since long before any government surveyor rode north from Fort Benton. In Blackfeet tradition, the Sweetgrass Hills themselves are not incidental geography. They are named in the deepest layer of the creation account, the leftover earth and stone from the shaping of the world, set down last and set down deliberately. The Chippewa-Cree carry a separate account tied to the same ground, describing a flood that covered the world and a being who took shelter inside one particular cave in these hills until the water went down, and who reshaped what remained of the world from inside it. Neither of those accounts was recorded for the benefit of a mining company, and neither was invented to explain a hole in a rock. They predate the hole's discovery by outsiders by generations, which means Prather did not find a cave and attach a legend to it. He found a place a legend had already been pointing to. What can be independently confirmed by anyone willing to make the climb today lines up with Prather's book in a way that a fabricated account could not manage. The chamber is close to 50 feet from floor to the broken rock overhead. Two separate openings let daylight down into it, exactly as Prather described, giving the room its shifting green and grey character depending on the hour and the cloud cover. The entrance remains what he found it to be, a crawl space narrow enough that a grown man goes through on his stomach with his arms extended. And every visitor's account left in the log since the site became locally known describes the same physical sensation Prather did, without ever having read his book, since it was not public until decades after most of those accounts were written. A stillness inside the chamber that outside air does not seem to reach, a reluctance among people with no religious stake in the place at all to raise their voice once they are inside it. The Sweetgrass Hills are not the only place in Blackfeet country where this pattern holds, and the pattern is what separates a single strange cave from something worth taking seriously. Roughly 110 miles to the west, Chief Mountain rises alone off the Rocky Mountain front, its sheer east face visible for a great distance across the plains, and it has been documented for more than a century as the primary site for vision questing among Blackfeet men, a mountain climbed specifically to fast, alone, for 4 days without food or water, in search of a power no outsider's record has ever claimed to define, only to note that men returned from it changed and rarely discussed what had occurred on the mountain in any detail an outsider could record. Two of the oldest medicine bundles carried in Blackfeet tradition today, the long-time pipe and a thunder pipe associated with the warrior Red Eagle, are held by tribal historians to have been received on that mountain and at a related site to the east, in a period so far back that it predates the era of the horse on the plains altogether. Further south, the Badger II medicine country carries the same designation today in federal and tribal filings alike, described in legal testimony as a landscape whose spiritual function is inseparable from its physical integrity, a place elders have fought industrial drilling permits to protect for decades, specifically because the ground itself, not any structure built on it, is understood to be the source of the power in question. That fight is still active. It has outlasted multiple leaseholders, 2 federal buyback programs, and every attempt by outside industry to treat the land as an ordinary mineral asset rather than what the people who have always lived beside it say it is. A fourth site sits inside the Sweetgrass Hills themselves, a smaller opening locals refer to only as the Bear's Den, discussed among hikers in the same breath as the Devil's Chimney, but rarely visited, rarely photographed, and never, in any account gathered for this record, entered by anyone who described the experience afterward, in more than a sentence or two. 4 places, 100 miles apart in some cases, and a few hundred yards apart in others, and in every one of them the documented pattern is identical. The site is physically unusual in a way that predates any story told about it. The story was already old before any settler wrote it down, and the people who know the ground best have never needed the physical opening, the cave mouth, or the vision site explained to them, because the explanation was never the point. The place simply is what it is, and their caution around it long precedes anyone's need to justify that caution to a surveyor with a transit and a letter from Boston. That is the detail worth sitting with longer than any single measurement in Prather's book. His 2 guides did not warn him with a story. They did not need one. They stopped at the base of the mountain because the mountain was already understood, inside a body of knowledge older than the copper syndicate that sent him there, older than the territory itself, and their stopping was not superstition performing itself for a stranger's benefit. It was simply the correct response of people who already knew what the ground was, delivered to a man who had to climb it himself before he understood even a fraction of what they meant. What the settler record adds to that older knowledge is narrow, and it is worth being honest about how narrow it is. It adds a date, it adds a name, Walter Prather, and a season, 1887, and a company report that buried its own most interesting finding in a single dismissive line. It adds independent physical confirmation from a man with no religious stake in the outcome and every professional incentive to describe the place in cold commercial terms, a man who nonetheless could not stop himself from writing that the chamber felt occupied and then crossing the word out because he did not know how to defend it. What it does not add, and should not pretend to add, is any explanation the Blackfeet themselves had not already arrived at generations earlier. The surveyor's book is a footnote. The hills were never waiting for it. Prather closed his field book for that season with a short entry, written the night he came back down off the East Butte, before the guides had said a word to him about what he'd found. It reads only that he had seen a room that something had finished before he arrived, that no company report would ever adequately describe it, and that he did not intend to go back up. He kept that promise for the rest of his life, through 2 more years in the territory and 3 decades in Spokane afterward, and no letter or notebook from any of those later years so much as mentions the Sweetgrass Hills again. The chamber is still there today, 50 feet of vaulted stone lit by 2 accidental skylights, a narrow crawl at its base worn smooth by however many generations of people found reason to enter it before an eastern mining company ever sent a man north to look for copper. The 2 guides who stopped at the bottom of that mountain are not named anywhere in the surviving record. That is not an oversight to be corrected. In its own way, it may be the most honest thing the record ever managed to preserve, a silence that respected exactly the boundary it was supposed to. What remains, more than a century later, is a short list of hard facts and a longer list of things nobody with any right to speak on them has ever tried to explain away. The chamber's dimensions can be checked by anyone willing to make the crawl. The company report's single dismissive sentence sits in the Helena archive for anyone willing to request the letterbook. Prather's crossed-out line about a room that felt occupied is still legible under the strike-through, ink pressed hard enough into the page that 139 years have not lifted it. And the older account, the one that named this ground sacred before any surveyor rode north to price its rock, has needed no company report, no field book, and no Eastern engineer to confirm what it already understood. The mountain was never withholding a secret from Walter Prather. It simply was not his to open, and for one long moment in 1887, standing alone in 50 feet of borrowed light, he seems to have understood that as clearly as anyone ever has. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.